Welcome to Hope Talks Podcast, Conversations for Families with Special Needs. This is where we talk about challenges that families face, and we provide them hope and inspiration and all kinds of information and resources, not just for today, but also for the future. I'm your host, Julie Catman. I am the co-founder of Healing Complex Kids and the co-author of Pathway to Hope Resource Guide for Special Needs. One of the biggest milestones that families that have children with special needs face is trying to figure out, what do you do when your child turns 18? And joining me today from the Arc of Oakland County are Calnen and Christie K. Welcome, ladies.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. We have so much to unpack and try to understand, what do families need to know? How do they prepare? How do they get ready for their child turning 18 and themselves for that child turning 18? So let's start with a real easy question. We have a lot of acronyms. What does IDD stand for, and what does it mean? Because I know we're going to use IDD a lot.
Sure. IDD is an umbrella term that stands for Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities. It is a condition or group of conditions that limit a person's ability to learn, to adapt, and or to participate in activities of daily living. It could come in early childhood at birth, but also, by definition, it could happen prior to the age of 22. So people who develop epilepsy or have traumatic brain injuries could fall into the category of IDD.
Is there ever another term that we can use that maybe parents want to use if they don't remember or don't want to use IDD that they also get traction with?
I think utilizing just the person's particular diagnoses, right? So it could be autism spectrum disorder or Down syndrome, or maybe a more sort of niche genetic disorder, right? So kind of naming the actual condition.
And that's important when we're talking about getting services, when we're talking about impacting policies. It's not so important around the dinner table. When we're just together as families, it's important to just, label it as their person has certain needs.
Can you describe what the transition to adulthood really means for people with IDD and what stage is important?
Sure. So for us, in the work that we do, we support families a lot in the transition from the age of 17 to 18, right? Because there's that legal occurrence, right? Where the individual now becomes sort of in charge of the business end of being a person, right? So they're now responsible for signing legal documents or making important decisions about finances or school or otherwise. So families will really take some time in considering prior to that, 18th birthday, how does their loved one need support in kind of making decisions or just navigating the world? So we find that can be a really important transition for families. And then in particular, in the state of Michigan, our educational system provides post-secondary education up until the age of 26. So we're very lucky in that. But it does create sort of a secondary transition for families that experience, kind of leaving the safety of that school setting and then kind of navigating, the vast landscape of community supports.
What advice do you have for parents navigating that legal transition to 18?
So one of the biggest misconceptions when an individual is turning 18 is that there's a switch that gets flipped and everything has to happen all on that day. The biggest advice that I give for families who have loved ones turning 18 is eat cake. And
I love it.
I say, on that 18th birthday, that's a milestone. That's something to celebrate. That is not a day you need to be in our office getting the services that you think you need. But in all seriousness, when an individual turns 18, no matter who it is, a lot changes as it relates to access to information, to one big thing is medical. Every parent I know who has a loved one that turns 18 receives an email from the electronic medical record that they no longer have access to their loved one's medical records. So the biggest advice that we give, and we give it early on, we give it as we go, as the journey of having a loved one with a disability goes, is to make sure that you are ready for that. And the way you do that is you decide how to create a system of supports so that decisions can be made and the individual can be a part of making those decisions.
Now, you said something interesting. I know HIPAA is something you have to fill out to get access to your loved one's medical records. If you have someone with IDD and they're maybe not capable of writing or there's things going on, what's that process look like?
Yeah, so another misconception is that folks who have IDD do not have competence to make decisions and give consent. And that is absolutely not true.
Thank you. I teed you up. That's what I wanted you to.
Absolutely. So we must presume competence in all people. And if we look at it from that lens, we set people up for the greatest of successes. So a couple things I tell families, pretty blunt. Just because a person may not be able to write, just because a person may not be able to speak, does not mean that person does not know how to communicate their wants and their needs.
So if they can't write, does a parent have to go to court, or can they still have them scratch something down there and then it's okay? I mean, how does that work?
Absolutely. No individual needs to be able to sign their name in order to attest to their wishes. Sometimes if we have concerns, we might have a notary be there to be able to say that they witnessed the individual consenting to whatever it is that they are doing.
This is great. I don't think a lot of parents know that. And some of them are so afraid, oh my gosh, I've got to go to court. I've got to do X, Y, and Z. I don't know where to start.
Sure.
So great.
So
great
we do a lot of talking surrounding supported decision making, and I know Christie, she does a lot of presentations about that. So maybe we could get into a little bit of what we talk to parents about.
That is exactly my next question. I want to know about the differences because we've talked about that and how important it is to have supported decision making versus the much more stringent complete control, right? So most parents think, Christie, that they have to go to court to get complete guardianship, but you can also tell us about supported decision making. Can you kind of break down the differences?
Yeah, absolutely. So guardianship can be a part of supported decision making. So really, supported decision making is a concept that we all utilize every single day, but we're not necessarily taking the time to think, I'm going to engage Dawn in a decision that I'm going to make. She's going to support me and we're going to do supported decision making together. But it really is. So anytime you're consulting with, a friend about maybe a problem that you have and you're getting their advice, that's supported decision making. So there are very few choices that any of us make that is in total isolation. I mean, think about it. Like, how often are you talking to family members, like, what should we have for dinner tonight? Right? You're not just kind of making that decision. You are consulting with the group and then making that choice. So you might be gaining some information that helps to provide some insight that you didn't have before, right? So supported decision making is that concept, but it's the idea that we can help people with intellectual and developmental disabilities sort of create a network of people that they trust, that they knows them really well, that has their best interests at heart, and they can consult with them about, big or small decisions on a daily basis. So it is a concept that can be applicable to many different situations. So when we think about sort of the continuum of supported decision making, it could be situations where we're kind of informally helping a person to make choices. It could be where we are identifying a power of attorney and kind of formalizing that legal document where we say, hey, I'm identifying someone as my power of attorney to help me make financial or, medical decisions. And then guardianship, again, can be a component of supported decision making. It is considered the most restrictive form because it's a process where the court determines someone to be incapacitated and so not able to make decisions. However, when we're, talking with families, we always encourage them to, even when a guardianship is necessary, we're still not taking the person at the center of that out of those conversations. So even if, perhaps the person's ability to verbally communicate is limited, right? We're still not going to have those conversations without that person present because at the end of the day, it is about that individual. So it's something I'm really passionate about.
So what are some of the most important milestones that families can be looking at and focusing on as their child gets close to that transition of 18?
So one of the areas throughout a person's lifetime, we call it a journey, that we hope that families can really focus on is setting their loved one up to be their own best advocate. And that will carry forward in everything that they are doing. So the ability for them to be able to make their wishes known, speak up for what they want and they need, across all the areas.
Something that I think we notice is that there are times when parents of a child with an intellectual or developmental disability might sort of get into the habit of doing for. And it's not intentional, right? It is just, my loved one needs support. And so in some cases it might just be that I'm doing most of it for them. And then, after a period of time, we kind of realize that wow, we've just been doing for so long that we haven't really given, them the opportunity to sort of be exposed to those conversations or environments and tasks and, play the role that they can with the support that is appropriate. So, part of what I like to tell families is to treat your child with special needs just like you would, any other child, and kind of focus on the skills that any child would need to be successful. And, self-advocacy is a big one. I think just being able to kind of identify the helpers and, communicate your wants and needs, that's really what I kind of focus on when working with families.
It's so true. The self-advocacy, the communication, knowing who they can go to for safety if they've got questions, that's so huge.
Real quick, I wanted to mention, I was listening to a parent who was talking about how they didn't give up. And what they meant was their loved one was struggling when going to the dentist. And it was years since they've had x-rays. And they kept exposing their loved one to the experience. And they were successful, finally, because they kept on keeping on.
Well, that's one of the things we've talked about with life skills. It's like you may not be where you'd like to be, but just keep going forward. Like you said, it's a journey.
Absolutely.
And like tying your shoes. Some kids may do it at the age appropriate age. Others may do it much later in life.
That's right.
But they're still working toward it.
That's right.
So it's important. So a huge question for so many of our families that are feeling really overwhelmed and thinking, oh my gosh, my kid's almost 18. What do I do? When should they begin planning, number one? And what are the steps, I guess, to preparing for turning 18?
Sure. So I don't say this to scare people because it's okay if you weren't doing this prior to the age of 16 or 17. But it is important for families to start planning as soon as they are able. So if you know that your loved one has been diagnosed with an intellectual developmental disability, start planning then. So when you receive important documents from medical professionals or school professionals, it's important to keep those documents in a safe place because you might need them one day. A perfect example, we talked about when people turn 18 that there's legal changes and things that need to take place, but there's also certain government benefits or access to community mental health resources. And to be able to access that resource, documentation is key. So we tell people to always document the journey and make sure that you have the actual physical documents or scanned documents so that you have them when you're ready. So the short answer is begin where you're at. Begin when you know and when you can. It's never too early, but it's also never too late.
I love that.
I do too. It's never too early, but it's never too late.
Yes. Yeah.
So what about checklists? Are there any checklists that you recommend that we maybe need to be talking to families about to gather all their information?
So from an educational perspective, when someone's receiving special education services in the state of Michigan, the professionals in that school setting who are supporting that student should be broaching the conversation of supported decision making at least by the age of 16, so that families kind of have some time to consider, what is going to work for them in terms of that formal kind of changing, from 17 to 18 and the legal decision capacity. So, we encourage families to at least start to think about it then. Again, you can't be too early, you can't be too late. We can always, make things happen. But I think just to allow families time to kind of wrap their brains around what that transition might look like, what safeguards or tools they might utilize to support that person can be really beneficial, just so that it's not sort of like, Susie's going to turn 18 tomorrow. What are we going to do? You know, that can make people feel really scared. So
Very overwhelmed.
yeah,
For sure.
What about checklists?
Yeah, so we have a checklist. We give people a checklist. I have an interesting sort of way I think about checklists. In my experience, I feel like people can be very overwhelmed. You know, the school gives you a checklist. Your doctor gives you a checklist. I don't want people to be overwhelmed with checklists, but what I say is use them as a guide. But it doesn't mean that at the age of 18, everything needs to be checked off.
Mm-hmm.
There's no perfect solution to getting all the ducks in a row. And 18 isn't a magic age. It's an age where there is a transition. So, one of the key things is, you know, we talk about what do you need? What does your loved one need at this age?
Mm-hmm.
So if they're still in school, it may not be that they need to connect with the community resources that are available. So we might look at on the checklist, we might look at applying for government benefits because that is a resource, an income resource to individuals that can really help to offset some other costs. So we at the ARC really work closely with the families and the individuals on what they need at each stage of their life. And then we focus on that part of the checklist and we help to check that off.
Now, we have some families that have said, well, my child's taken care of. I don't need to apply for anything. What do you say to those families? Because I know there's a lot in that statement.
Yes. So a couple of things. That's wonderful if you feel that your child doesn't need sort of the income benefit that they might qualify for at the age of 18, because at 18, that resource is based upon their own income. So likely they will qualify. But with that comes a great resource called Medicaid. And what I tell the wealthiest of families is the cost of care, because that's what pays for that care, the cost of care for a loved one for their lifetime is extremely high. And the wealthiest of people might need help. So it's very important to consider it no matter where you are in the income bracket.
So, Christie, can you tell me some examples of how you can help kids who have IDD to build life skills and common things like money management, transportation, self-advocacy?
Sure. Yeah. So I think, you know, it sort of harkens back to what we talked about previously. It's exposure to those activities, the opportunity to participate in, you know, budgeting activities, right? Taking a small amount of money and, you know, determining how you're going to spend it at the grocery store. Sort of being prepped for a conversation maybe where you have to ask for something, right? The self-advocacy piece, right? So really kind of helping young adults feel competent to kind of take risks, right? But in a safe manner, and really just supporting that person and being exposed to those different things. Because again, I think there are times when unintentionally, we're doing so much for that we're forgetting to provide the opportunity to learn those skills. And then, you know, utilizing what is available through community-based services in terms of community living support staffing hours, right? So, you know, a caregiver that can come in and it's not mom or dad, right? Saying, you know, we need to learn how to budget your spending money, right? It's another person.
Let me back you up.
Sure.
Community living support hours.
Yes.
Talk about that.
Yeah. So CLS, community living supports, it's a Medicaid funded service. So someone that utilizes Medicaid funds can have a plan of service that details various goals that are meant to either maintain someone's independence or help them to develop independence in certain activities of daily living. So that CLS staff can help to kind of provide exposure to those different activities and help the person along in gaining those skills. So I think especially when we're talking about, those teenage years and early adolescence, all young people really start to kind of push back against your parents, right? That's just a natural sort of way that the world goes. So, I always encourage families, if they're able to kind of utilize staffing in that way, because I think it can take pressure off the parents and in some cases even improve the relationship between the parent and child, because it's not just, the parent kind of harping on their kid. So.
Well, and it goes back to what we were talking about. This is a Medicaid funded service that you would not get unless you apply for it.
Right. Yes.
Perfect.
And that service typically will provide care for the person for their entire lifetime.
So we were talking earlier about some of your success stories and how you have helped some of your clients go from having, I think, really strict guardianship to now being able to self-advocate and get supported decision-making. Would you share Amy's story?
Absolutely.
So when, could you tell me when you first had a guardian? When did that start for you?
Well, my mother died in October of 07, and her friends, and we ran a food program for the city of Wall Lake, and her friends decided I couldn't handle my money and that I needed to have a guardian.
Okay. So those folks, it sounds like thought that they were helping you by getting someone who would kind of control your finances.
Yes.
Okay. So when did that guardianship start to become problematic for you? When did it start to feel like it was not something that was working in your best interest?
Well, when I found out I only had a little bit of spending money. I mean, it was $20 a month was my spending money. And for me, I had my own townhouse. Yes, I had a roommate, but after I came out of the group home, I didn't get it in the group home, but after it came out, I needed to have more money for like household appliances.
And you had money available, right? It's not like you didn't have funds for that, but the guardian wasn't allowing you to spend above what they had determined was your spending money. And you were also working, right? So some of this money was wages too, right?
Now, I started my own Avon business without telling the guardian because mom left me a van and I needed gas for transportation. So I started my own Avon business.
So a few years ago, I was in a meeting and I had known Amy, who is an adult who has a disability, and I didn't know her well enough. I didn't know her story and her circumstances. But after the meeting, she asked to speak with me and told me that she was under a guardianship and a conservatorship, and could I help her end it? And at first I was thinking, that's not an easy task. Like, I need to find out. I need to know more. And it took a lot of time, but we dug into it. And what we found out was that when Amy's mom passed away, people who thought they were doing the right thing made decisions that significantly impacted Amy's life and restricted her ability to make day-to-day decisions, buying concert tickets or how she was going to get to work, how she was going to pay for it. And everything she wanted to do, she had to request.
Tell me the story about needing a new van. Can you talk to me about that?
The new van story.
Mm-hmm.
So I got it. I had my Avon business, but then I went to Easter Sales Mart. Well, now it's Easter Sales Mart, but it was Morgue Incorporated, and I was in the lunchroom, and I was working with, I saw an informant, and he was recruiting for peer mentors, which I am now. I'm one
Mm-hmm.
the state. I'm certified from the state, and I I just asked him if we could work the Avon because I didn't want to lose any money that I gained. I didn't want to lose any money or my Avon customers from my clientele. If he thought it would be feasible for me to work my Avon with while I was preparing for my peer mentor uh, degree, and he said, fine. He said, we can work it out. So then I went, if you know, with the peer mentors, you have to go to OCHN, which is Oakland Community Health Network, and get extra training from that for the peer mentors. So I went there and I met Vicky Suter, and I asked her if she needed any help, whether it be paid or not. I was just wanting to help someone. And she gave me a couple RFPs. And then one day, she in I think June, I went in and I asked Vicky if she needed help, if she needed my help, and I said, do you need any more help? She said, oh, I've been wanting to call you. I've been thinking of you because there's a new position and you have your van. That's the one Mom left me.
Mm-hmm.
You have your van and you have 24-hour care. So there's no reason you can't work, and this job would be just perfect for you.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, oh, thank you. So I got the interview and I worked the job for about 2 years. And the job was going around the county of Oakland and going to group homes, which I love. I still do it to this day, but I do it another way. And then my uh, transmission blew out of the van. And I'm like, what do I do? So I called my lawyer, my account, and he said I could get another van. And so I called the lady. I said, well, I got my van and I want it to be fixed. And she said, well, you can never have a new van. I said, well, he just told me the day I met him that if I could save the money and then we take the money, the payment that I have to save the down payment, and he would take the money out of my trust fund for the other payments. We could do a used van for me because I'm in a wheelchair and I needed a ramp. And she said, oh no, you can't ever do that. Once this van clunks out, you can never get another van.
From a conservator attorney who, isn't there on the weekends when you want to have those decisions, make those decisions. So in the end, we were able to win back Amy's freedom. And the day that we were at court, it was on Zoom, but the day we were at court, there were tears everywhere, cheers everywhere, and a recognition that we should never presume incompetence with folks and always look at what their abilities are. And Amy is such a story of success, and she tells her story of success with us when we go on the road and talk about supported decision making. I think Christie can probably share a little bit more about what Amy says.
One of my favorite stories that Amy frequently shares when we go out into the community and share about supported decision making is a story where, Amy requires a specialized vehicle for transportation. And so, when she was under the guardianship and conservatorship, she didn't have control over the way that she spent her money in terms of her transportation. And if her van needed, certain adjustments made, or, she had to ask permission in order to spend money on this vehicle that she really needed to get to work and to all the places that she wanted to go. So after she was successful in sort of regaining her legal rights, she had an experience where she was going to go see Donny Osmond, her favorite, performer. But on that day, it just so happened that her transportation broke down. However, because she had, full legal control, she was able to decide that she wanted to spend a certain amount of money to rent a vehicle to be able to still go to that concert. Whereas we know if that same situation would have occurred under guardianship, she would have had to have made a series of phone calls to a law office in order to get permission to spend money. And, it's likely that all of those dominoes would not have fallen in a timely fashion in order for her to be able to go and see, that concert. And so it's a tiny story, but it just says so much about when we do have control to, spend our money the way that we want or enjoy just, different things in the community, that it really, it supports our own self-worth and well-being.
So one of the issues when you're transitioning from being a pediatric patient now to an adult is figuring out, how do you deal with these medical services? How do you help families with this issue?
So a lot of what we do is just helping families understand there are a lot of doors that open at the age of 18 that might have been closed prior to that, right? Because the system of benefits and entitlements is largely income based, right? So if you have an income that is over a certain threshold, or you have assets that are over a certain threshold, then you're just not going to be eligible. And that means, for a child, it's their parent income, right? So once an individual turns 18, then it is based on their own income, right? And so for 18-year-olds, typically there isn't a whole lot of income coming in, right? So it provides eligibility to services that they may not have been eligible for previously, which can be really great. In circumstances where someone is eligible for services as a child and then transitions to 18, again, you have the sort of natural support that is presumed that a parent is going to provide, that kind of starts to trail off after 18 because you're an adult. And, when we're thinking about sort of peers, right, it's parents aren't playing that same role in a young person's life. And so the system of support sort of looks at it the same way, where we can kind of start to build in more supports for a person who is 18 and above versus when they were not.
But when they're actually transitioning, one of the hard things that I've heard from families is they're very used to their pediatrician. They're very used to their pediatric doctors. And now suddenly they're going to go to an adult, and it can be hard finding an adult doctor who understands the special need. So how do you help families? How do you encourage them with this? Because this can be overwhelming.
Yeah, and that comes up often with families that we meet for another reason, as far as applying for benefits and having to make sure that you have medical documentation of a diagnosis. And if they've already transitioned to another doctor, that doctor might not know their loved one. So we talk to families about start early talking to your pediatrician. Hopefully they're in a network of providers and they know somebody or work with somebody that they can start transitioning that patients to. That is when we find the most success, is when they're willing to coordinate and collaborate on that. But I can't say enough times that it is so important that you make sure you have proper documentation from people who really know your loved one the best. And usually it is the pediatrician at that time of their life.
And make sure, I would add, that the families are part of that team. Make sure that they are getting it all documented, because that is so important.
Absolutely.
So what message of hope would both of you give to families who are getting ready for this transition? How would you encourage them?
Oh, wow. So one of the things that I've said it earlier and I'll say it again is when your loved one's turning 18, what do you need to do? Plan the party, eat the cake, celebrate. It's a milestone and it should be celebrated. And that's not to say that I don't understand the struggle. I understand the uniqueness, and I understand that it is a lifelong struggle and fear, but it's also important to recognize those milestones. One other message I would give is keep on keeping on. You know, the story earlier I told about the loved one who wouldn't go to the dentist. If you keep exposing your loved one to those experiences, we don't know. It's never too late for them to sort of open up to that opportunity.
I think just connecting with professionals in your area that are well-versed in supporting people with intellectual and developmental disabilities is a great first step. Maybe connecting with your local ARC chapter for that kind of support. And just really knowing that no matter how isolated you might feel, there are other people that are kind of walking the same walk that you are and kind of navigating the same journey. And there is the opportunity to connect with others where you might feel alone.
Well, there's like groups that are out there, plus even on social media.
Yes.
There are so many groups now that you can go, and they're private, where you can ask those questions and find out, hey, what do I need to do next?
Yeah. One of the things that I say to families, or we talk about, is you don't have to know everything. You don't have to be the expert. You just have to know who to turn to. And so, take it piece by piece and know who to turn to and look for the helpers.
Well, and you don't even have to know the questions, because if you find the helpers, they're going to give you the questions and they're going to lead you by the hand.
Absolutely.
Oh, thank you, ladies. This is such great information. I really appreciate your time today and talking about what to do when we're turning 18. It's a big transition.
Thank you so much for having us.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you for coming. For parents listening, I hope you take away not just the information, but also the encouragement that you are not alone in this. To take the next step, grab your copy of Pathway to Hope Resource Guide for Special Needs on Amazon. It's a roadmap filled with strategies, tools, and encouragement to help your family thrive. And for a personalized roadmap, check out the Hope Recovery Map on our Healing Complex Kids resource page. It guides families step by step with tailored tools and resources. And don't forget to follow us on YouTube, Instagram, and Facebook, where we share more tips, stories, and updates to support you every step of the way. If you found today's episode helpful, please share it with another family who could use some hope. Together, we can make sure no family feels alone in teaching this important information. Thank you so much for joining us today. Remember, progress may be slow, but every step forward matters. And no matter where you are in the journey, there is help, there is support, and there is hope.